He stayed silent while the world crowned her a duchess, while cameras flashed and headlines worshipped the fairy tale, while Prince Harry stood at the altar believing he had found destiny. And now, after nearly a decade of swallowing his own version of events, Trevor Engelson is finally stepping forward, and what he is revealing about Meghan Markle's hidden past is shaking everything people thought they knew. For almost 10 years, Trevor Engelson said nothing. Not when Meghan Markle's engagement to Prince Harry became global news. Not when she walked into St. George's Chapel in that white gown. Not when she and Harry sat down for explosive interviews blaming the palace. He rebuilt his life quietly. He remarried. He moved forward. But according to those close to him, there was always one thing that gnawed at him. The world only ever heard Meghan's side of their marriage, never his. People used to whisper about why Trevor's family seemed distant during his relationship with Meghan, why their warmth never matched her charm, why there was a quiet tension behind the scenes. And now, as Trevor finally begins to open up, those early doubts don't look like random family unease, they look like warning signs. One moment stands out like a shadow that never left him. During their marriage, Meghan reportedly told Trevor she could not have children. That single statement changed everything about the future he had imagined. There were no dramatic confrontations, no medical consultations, no second opinions. Trevor trusted her completely. Loving her meant accepting the life she described, even if that meant letting go of dreams he once held. He adjusted quietly. He reshaped his expectations. He never used her words against her in arguments. He never turned it into a weapon during fights. He believed her without hesitation. Years later, when Meghan Markle welcomed 2 children with Prince Harry, that memory resurfaced like a crack splitting open old glass. According to those familiar with Trevor's reaction, it wasn't rage that hit him first, it was confusion. A deep, lingering confusion. The kind that forces you to revisit conversations you once accepted without question. The kind that makes you wonder which version of reality was true. But that was only one fracture in a marriage that would eventually collapse in a way few could imagine. After nearly a decade together, flights back and forth, sacrifices made, careers balanced, the end did not come with the final conversation. There was no tearful goodbye, no long discussion about what went wrong. One day, a small package arrived at Trevor's door. Inside that package was Meghan Markle's wedding ring. No note, no explanation, no farewell. Just the symbol of their marriage returned through the mail like an item being sent back to a store. For Trevor, it wasn't the ring itself that cut deep, it was what it represented. The decision had already been made. The emotional exit had happened long before the physical one. When he opened that box, everything his family once sensed, the growing distance, the subtle imbalance, suddenly made painful sense. The mailed ring wasn't the moment the marriage broke. It was proof that it had been broken long before. For a long time, Trevor had no clear understanding of why Meghan had drifted away. The returned ring said she was done, but not why. That explanation, according to insiders, came later through conversations about something Meghan had reportedly created years before she ever met Prince Harry, a vision board. Vision boards usually hold career goals, travel dreams, motivational quotes, but this one allegedly had Prince Harry placed directly at the center, not as a distant celebrity crush, not as fantasy, as part of a mapped-out future. Those who claim to have seen it describe it not as scattered ambition, but as a structured path. Meghan Markle studying the royal family, imagining herself not just beside a man, but inside an entirely different world. When Trevor learned about this, the confusion he once felt about her gradual emotional withdrawal began to look less like uncertainty and more like movement towards something bigger, something royal, something that required him to become part of her past. And then there's the detail that continues to spark debate among insiders, the first meeting between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. According to sources, Meghan arrived wearing Princess Diana's favorite perfume. Princess Diana's scent was deeply tied to Prince Harry's childhood memories, to comfort, to grief, to the emotional space left behind after losing his mother. Smell has a powerful way of triggering memory. It can create warmth, familiarity, connection before logic ever steps in. To Harry, that meeting reportedly felt fated. Warm, unexplainably comforting. But to those who knew Meghan before her royal chapter, the choice did not feel accidental. It felt deliberate, a quiet decision designed to create emotional resonance. When Trevor later heard this detail, a pattern began forming in his mind. The calculated transitions, the quiet shifts, the steady detachment from their shared life. What he once interpreted as confusion began to resemble intention. Meanwhile, Prince Harry stood publicly defending Meghan against critics, against the press, against the palace. He believed he understood her completely. But when Trevor finally began breaking his silence, something shifted inside Montecito. Insiders described not explosive arguments, but silence, long pauses, private reflections. Harry reportedly stopped immediately dismissing every criticism as palace conspiracy. One remark attributed to Harry echoed loudly, "Stop blaming the palace for everything." It wasn't a declaration of betrayal. It wasn't a public confrontation. It was something quieter, doubt entering where certainty once stood. And according to whispers surrounding Trevor, this may not be the full extent of what he knows. There are suggestions of interviews, private documents, timelines, letters, details he has chosen not to release out of restraint. Some claim attempts to silence him, legally or socially, may only be strengthening his resolve to speak more openly. Trevor Engelson's silence was once interpreted as weakness, but those who understand him describe it differently, as dignity, as loyalty, as closure he created for himself even when it was not offered to him. Now, as he steps forward, the narrative surrounding Meghan Markle's rise feels less one-dimensional. The story shifts from fairy tale to layered complexity. Trevor knew Meghan before the palace, before the Duchess title, before the global spotlight. His account doesn't rely on royal protocol or media strategy. It comes from shared years, private moments, and an ending sealed inside a small mailed package. Whether the world views his revelations as overdue truth or unresolved history, one thing is undeniable: the silence has been broken. And once the first voice from the past speaks, others often follow. What makes Trevor Engelson's silence so powerful isn't just that he stayed quiet, it's that he stayed quiet while watching the woman he once built a life with completely reinvent herself in front of the world, transforming from Meghan Markle, the actress he married, into Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, the symbol of rebellion against the very royal institution she had once allegedly studied so closely. And according to those who know Trevor personally, that transformation didn't just surprise him, it forced him to confront memories he had buried deep. Memories that suddenly felt less like random moments and more like pieces of a larger pattern that had been unfolding long before he ever realized it. Because Trevor didn't just lose a wife, he lost a shared reality. He lost the version of Meghan he thought he knew, the version who once built dreams with him, the version who laughed beside him, the version who promised a future defined by partnership, not distance. And when the world began praising Meghan Markle as a symbol of authenticity, as someone who escaped a restrictive royal system, Trevor was left standing in the shadows of a story that didn't match the private reality he had lived. The truth is, Trevor never fought publicly for attention. He never gave explosive interviews during the peak of Meghan and Harry's global media storm. He never tried to disrupt their wedding. He never attempted to inject himself into their narrative. And that silence, ironically, gave Meghan Markle complete control over the public perception of her past. The world saw her as a woman who closed one chapter of her life and stepped into another. But Trevor lived the experience of being erased from that chapter as if he had never existed at all. People close to Trevor say that for years, he accepted that erasure. He focused on rebuilding his career. He found stability. He eventually found love again. He built a new family. But there was always one truth he carried quietly. The ending of his marriage had never been fully explained. The mailed wedding ring wasn't just a physical object. It was a message without words. It was closure without conversation. And that kind of ending doesn't fade easily. Because when someone sends back a wedding ring without explanation, it forces you to question everything that came before it. Every promise, every moment, every shared plan. And according to those familiar with Trevor's emotional journey, it wasn't anger that lingered most strongly, it was realization. The realization that the emotional separation may have begun long before the physical one. The realization that while he was still investing emotionally in the marriage, Meghan Markle may have already been mentally preparing to move forward into a different life. That realization became even heavier when Trevor watched Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's relationship unfold at record speed. Their courtship moved quickly. Their engagement followed swiftly. Their wedding became one of the most watched global events in modern history. And while the world celebrated their love story, Trevor remained a silent witness to the transformation of someone he once knew intimately. According to insiders, this wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about bitterness. It was about perspective. Trevor had experienced Meghan Markle in a completely different context. Before royal titles, before international fame, before global sympathy. He knew the private version of her. The version without palace gates, without royal security, without media filters. And that perspective carries weight. Because when someone knows you before your reinvention, they remember the moments that the public never sees. Meanwhile, Prince Harry himself had gone through his own transformation. He had stepped away from royal duties. He had relocated to California. He had publicly criticized the royal institution he was born into. And throughout all of it, he stood beside Meghan Markle, defending her fiercely against criticism. He believed in her completely. He trusted her version of events. But when Trevor Engelson finally began speaking openly about his past with Meghan, something shifted subtly in the atmosphere surrounding Harry. Not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. Because hearing the perspective of someone who had known Meghan Markle long before the royal narrative existed introduced a new dimension, one that Harry had never personally witnessed. According to whispers circulating among insiders, Harry began reflecting more deeply on timelines, conversations, and emotional transitions. Not accusing, not confronting, but thinking. Because hearing Trevor's experience didn't just introduce new information, it introduced context, and context has the power to reshape understanding. Trevor, meanwhile, never positioned himself as an enemy. He never launched personal attacks. He never attempted to dismantle Meghan Markle's public image directly. Instead, he simply allowed his version of events to exist, and that alone was enough to create ripple effects. Because truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it arrives through reflection. Sometimes it arrives through the voice of someone who was there before the spotlight ever appeared. People close to Trevor say he has spent years protecting himself emotionally. He didn't want to reopen old wounds. He didn't want to relive painful memories. But watching the world embrace a narrative that didn't fully match his lived experience eventually created a breaking point. Not driven by revenge, driven by closure. And closure doesn't always come from silence. Sometimes closure comes from being heard. Now, Trevor Engelson stands in a completely different place in life. He has stability. He has peace. He has moved forward in ways that once seemed impossible during the emotional aftermath of his divorce. But his story remains a permanent part of Meghan Markle's origin, a chapter that existed before the palace, before the title, before the transformation. And as more people begin revisiting that chapter, the global perception of Meghan Markle's rise feels less like a simple fairy tale and more like a layered journey filled with complex transitions, private decisions, and emotional consequences. Because behind every public reinvention lies a private past, and behind every private past lies someone who remembers it. Trevor Engelson was that someone. He was there before the cameras, before the royal engagement, before the Duchess title, before the global narrative. He was there at the beginning. And now, after nearly a decade of silence, his voice has finally entered the story. Not to destroy it, not to control it, but to remind the world that every story has more than one side, has more than one side, has more than one side, has more